everyone, I'm Jill Aitoro with SC Media, and I want to thank you for joining me today. I'm excited that we are launching Cybersecurity Awareness Month, which of course is every October. I always joke that every month is Awareness Month in cybersecurity, so I'm not really sure why we pick a certain month to spotlight it, but it's not a bad thing, so that's good. This year, we are kind of looking at the people aspect of awareness, that being how much you can really rely on the user community to adhere to security standards and how much security practitioners can maybe take on over so we don't have to lay too much in the laps of the user community. Among those areas that I want to focus on is actually looking at the password, which is kind of the ultimate when it comes to user security. And with me to have that discussion is Alex Weinert. He is Microsoft's Director of Identity Security. Microsoft has a lot of really interesting perspective when it comes to handling passwords themselves internally and even externally. So Alex is going to talk to us a bit about that. So Alex, thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. So I do, kind of want to look at this password management kind of as a major factor contributing to all sorts of security challenges across verticals. So I kind of want to look at first, broadly speaking, from your perspective, and then we'll dig into what Microsoft does and so forth. Do you feel that the challenges we face with passwords are a people problem, or is this more a tactics problem? How would you describe it?
I'd say ultimately it's a passwords problem, right? and not to be too glib, but in the long run, like we've shown, the password is not really a viable mechanism, especially with current technology for security. We've got a bunch of research that we published on this. As attacks have evolved, like we can say, pretty concrete that passwords aren't great. We need to sort of stop thinking about trying to say, well, I'm going to ask my user to pick the one password that nobody on the planet has ever picked ever before. And then it has to be like some super convoluted thing that they're also going to memorize and never write down. Like that whole thing is not, particularly reasonable. It leads to a lot of customer and user frustration. We drive a ton of help desk costs around that. And at the end of the day, we still end up with things like phishing attacks that really don't care what your password is. They're just they're gonna work. So our real focus on passwords is really to get rid of them if at all possible, and then to augment them with MFA where we can.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's funny. We had InfoSec Worlds, I don't know, I guess about a week or two ago now. All days are running together. And we had Robert Herjavec on there, and he did say kind of he shared in that kind of disdain for passwords, but he thought it would take 5 years or longer before we actually get rid of them. What do you think? You think we have a ways to go?
Well, I like to joke there's always like that one application that was written by Leroy in 1973, and like that dude disappeared into the forest and somewhere in Oregon, and we don't know where they went, and not going to update that app. So yeah, you're gonna have old legacy things. I think we hope to see a preponderance shift away from passwords. We're for password attacks, here's a fun statistic for you. We are seeing right now about 1,000 passwords attacks per second.
Wow.
120% increase over the last year. And so we can see there's just this barrage of attacks, right? And so I think that problem is being recognized. We're seeing adoption starting to move on MFA and enterprises and in consumer systems. And so we're starting to see this move away from just relying on the password. For passwordless, I think we're seeing some really important things happening in industry, things like passkey, that are going to move us to a place where we can get broad adoption. But we're going to have some systems with passwords, we'll be in rocking chairs on the porch, with Leroy before they're all gone.
Yeah, unfortunately, I would say. But now Microsoft, has been pretty public. Certainly your CISO has been pretty public about his desire to kind of rid Microsoft of passwords. I know there was some shifts in policy internally. So first, let me know what kind of rolled out internally for those who aren't aware at Microsoft, and how has it been going?
Yeah, so we've done a couple of things. One of the things that I think we have a bunch of fallacies that are unfortunately still around things like changing your password every 3 months will help you, or having a complex, uppercase, lowercase numbers and special will help you. And the research shows that those actually are harmful to security. So our CISO, Brett, first remove the password change policy. So we only change passwords when they're shown compromised. And that's had a huge impact in terms of reducing user frustration and actually increasing security. The most important thing, though, that has happened is that we've enforced MFA across the entire company. So everybody who accesses Microsoft resource has to use MFA to do so, without any exceptions. And that's really, had a huge impact. And then we're piloting our passwordless stuff. So, the vast majority of people at Microsoft are logging on with something like Windows Hello or the Authenticator app, which neither of those require a password at all. So we get rid of all that help desk costs. We get rid of all that insecurity.
So you mentioned NFA, and like I do always, kind of wonder, because you did mention the frustration with passwords, which without question I think is universal. But do you get similar frustrations with MFA, or does it, it depends on the approach, I assume?
Yeah, with something like Windows Hello, I mean, for me to log in, I open my laptop and I look at it, right? And so there's frustration in that. I think that again, we have this sort of changing of expected user behavior. There are people who are used to doing things in a certain way. Almost always when we shift to doing it the new way, especially with a modern multi-factor auth, things like the Authenticator or the Windows Hello, it's just a biometric. So it's like, we'll touch your phone or look at your phone and you're signed in. And that, for the most part, once people get used to it, they never want to go back.
Yeah.
Right? But there is that transition time of kind of getting a new habit. And so I think that's the only downside.
Yeah, it's funny too. We had, I think it was PayPal we had a conversation with, where it does sometimes seem like the user community is looking for a degree of friction to almost reinforce that they are actually secure. I don't know whether, Microsoft, workforce would necessarily feel that way. Maybe it's more of a consumer problem, but, whether or not there's a balance there, that long-term will have to be considered.
Yeah, I think we have, not so much at Microsoft, but we definitely have user communities where people, like in the old days, MFA was really clunky and hard, right?
Yeah.
Every few minutes your phone would buzz and you had to type in a code, and like you had to wait for the phone call to read you the code, and then you had to remember it and type it in, and you get it wrong, and so that stuff was really frustrating. And I think weirdly some people embrace that in a way that's like, oh, that frustration is my security, and the frustration was not what was creating the security there.
Yeah.
There's still people that have that mindset. So occasionally we have to kind of weirdly have to argue with people that, like, actually the cryptographic security you're getting from the biometrics and the trusted platform module and the device and all the stuff that we're doing there is way stronger, like much, much stronger than everything that was happening in the days of like reading back the code from your phone. And it's much less obtrusive, and the less obtrusive does not make it less secure. It actually more secure, but there is, again, that mental model of like, how do we remember the way it was supposed to be?
My company is going to yell at me, but for our CMS, we use a Google Authenticator, and I tell you, it is a pain to have to look that sucker up and enter it every single time. So I would love it if it was a little easier. I will say that.
There are definitely other options available.
Yeah, no, we might be calling. So, a lot of your effort, or at least Microsoft effort, I think took place amid COVID and remote work. If I'm remembering correctly, you all kind of launched it, I think, in 2019, really started revving it up in 2020. Did that have any kind of impact in terms of complicating the shift, or not necessarily?
Well, honestly, I think Microsoft and, again, our CISO kind of started this. We were pretty aggressive about pushing towards MFA all the time. And, the zero trust principle, which is that we don't really care where you are. We're going to explicitly verify the user and the device, wherever they happen to be. We were pretty aggressive about that before the pandemic. So actually for us, when that hit, we were able to transition to remote work almost seamlessly.
Yeah.
I think what it did for us was it helped the user community suddenly understand why it was all important, and like why, like suddenly where people are like, oh, I get it. So we probably reduced some of the complaints from the user community, but from our perspective, we didn't drive it from the pandemic. I think that our customers, however, in vast numbers, like we saw MFA usage double the day that everybody was sent home. Like it was crazy. Like we have the graphs from the servers, and everything went, spiked. And that was because all these policies that were about saying, well, I'll only do MFA if you're not in the office, they suddenly triggered because everybody was not in the office.
Yeah.
That actually ironically drove up MFA adoption, which drove down account compromise as a percentage of traffic. And so that was really, really good.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting.
We recognize that we have to get to this place where this is the new normal. Like nobody's, I believe you are in your home. I am clearly in my home,
Yeah.
like this. And this is sort of where we're at now. I think that embracing the idea of really strong user authentication is a big part of doing that successfully, making that transition successful.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you have like a pilot or a pool of folks that have tried going passwordless. Is that right? Is that where?
Yeah. We have a small group that basically the way that we do this at Microsoft is we have our objective, or I would say we come up with a wacky idea like, hey, what if nobody had a password? And then we develop the systems that we think will work. And then a small group of us adopt them for day-to-day life. And we find out all the ways in which they don't work. Right. And we try to tune out all those bugs. So in the old days, we used to call this eating your own dog food. Like if you have an idea or you build something, you have to try it yourself first. And then we'll eventually roll this out to all of Microsoft, and then Microsoft and maybe 10 other customers will all be doing it. And then at that point, we go into kind of everybody can do it. But we try to work out all the kinks before we, ask a lot of people to try it.
Right. So how's it going?
For me, I haven't known my password at Microsoft for about 4 years.
Yeah.
And so I scrambled mine and deleted it 4 years ago. And I'd say 98% of the time, it's not a problem at all. And then once in a while, I'll bump into an old system that, has some sort of glitch with, I use almost exclusively either FIDO tokens or Windows Hello. And if I get to a place where I can't do that, I'm fortunate in that I've been around Microsoft for a long time. I know a lot of people to call.
Yeah.
And we go figure out what's causing the bug. It's been really, really good. It was 98% of the time. The 2% of the time, it's very frustrating.
Right,
but that's why we do it internally first, is to try to work.
And probably not as frustrated as remembering a password all the time.
I don't have any password in either my Microsoft consumer account system or my enterprise account. And it's been great.
That's awesome. And have you guys identified any, cases where it has created problems with security, or is it more a matter of as long as it's approached correctly, this can not, maintain the security posture that you had, even if you were entering?
Strictly much, much more secure. The problems really exist again with if a system was really, if the UX for the system was built to only accept a password, for example, then the system itself has to change. And so, this gets a little bit more nuanced, but if you're dealing with like a really old critical system that you can't change, then we do things like we'll wrap a small perimeter around it. So like remote access or whatever, where getting to the perimeter requires your passwordless solution. And then the last, that last login is still specific to that application. I fortunately don't have any applications like that I have to access, but for, people in like finance or whatever that have really ancient crufty systems that they cannot change.
Healthcare, yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. It's that case of where, as this cultural shift in theory kind of happens, the technology is almost going to need to catch up to kind of enable it, with integration. So, right. I would imagine that could be the biggest challenge or delay that we end up seeing.
Your finger right on it. That is the biggest challenge. And I think from a security perspective, when you go to something like there's a technology called FIDO, which is the little USB keys, or Windows Hello, they really require that the attacker has access to the device.
Yeah.
And if you think about the common attacks like password spray, I can be in any country in the world attacking every country in the world, millions of times a second with no consequences. If you get me to where I have to get up to your computer when it's unlocked and access it, now we're at a whole different level of cost for those attackers. And so it's a much, much more challenging thing. So the security, the security is way, way higher, just because any attack to work requires getting super close to the device. The usability is mostly higher, again, except for those corner cases. And that's what we're trying to work through right now.
Yeah, it's awesome. Now, I know Microsoft also kind of changed its messaging on password management to customers. So when Microsoft is working with customers and speaking to customers, are there recommendations that are made externally, and are they being embraced, would you say?
Yeah, the number one, so while we are trying to transition to 100% MFA and trying to transition away from passwords, we recognize passwords are around, as you pointed out, they're around now and they're going to be around for a while. So ironically, the main thing we're trying to do now is to undo the guidance that was prevalent 20 years ago, right? So, there's still a lot of people who think, well, I got to have a complexity rule and I've got to change my passwords every so often. The complexity rule, if I give you an example, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and a special,
Yeah.
the very clearly show that all users and therefore all attackers will go after this pattern, which is and I bet you I'm going to describe your password right now. The first letter is uppercase. The next 4 to 6 letters are lowercase. The next 2 to 4 things are numbers. And the last character is an exclamation mark.
That's so funny. That's fun. I'm not commenting on that.
Yeah, don't comment. but about 70% of the time when I say that to a room full of people, but like 70% of the room looks down at their feet and kind of look, right. And it's not their fault. It's just that humans respond very predictably to predictable stimulus. If I ask you to have a rotating password, your password just very predictably became summer 2022 exclamation mark, right?
Yeah.
Fall 2022 exclamation. Or if you're a sports fan, maybe it's like, Seahawks 2022 or whatever. So
you
they're
gotta remember it. So yeah,
predictable. And so the net of that is that what we ask people to do instead is use what we call a dictionary checker, use a tool that looks at what patterns are being attacked and prevents users from going to those patterns, but otherwise puts no rules on the user, no linked rules, no complexity rules, and no expiration rules. Just don't pick the ones that are being guessed by the attackers. And those are well known and relatively few.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love it. So, like we already did talk about looking at the future and all of this going away. It obviously won't happen very much, but, is the secret that we do need to remove this from the user and place it more on the technology? And, are we in a position that we can actually do that?
Yeah, I think that is, when we look at the patterns that have emerged in, in cybersecurity, there's a bunch of things that are happening. The value that's in the digital ecosystem is much, much higher. Like everybody's bank is connected, everybody's home thermostat is connected, everybody's power grid is connected, like everything is accessible via login, which means that our attack surface area is up, the value to attackers is up, which means there's more attackers attacking more frequently. We have nation state actors getting in and inventing really cool things, novel things that then get codified into code sharing sites that get picked up by script kiddies. And so the evolution from Nobelium, the big attacks from SolarWinds all the way down to Lapsus, the recent attacks by teenagers, they're directly connected in this pattern. And so to ask like every individual user, every individual small business owner, every individual, retiree trying to protect their bank account to be like thinking about keeping up with these high, kind of high paced attacks isn't very realistic. So I do think that, we have essentially a mandate as a technology industry to both automate those defenses and make them really, really easy to use, right? So the passwordless thing is all about that. It's about saying we have credentials that are actually, you can't fall for phishing, you can't be social engineered, it's got to be your thumbprint, nobody else is going to get to it, and it's really, really easy to use. And that's the brass ring. That's what we're all working really hard together as an industry to do, is to make it trivially easy to do, and totally secure, so that the average person can just say, well, I use the cloud, it's fine.
Yeah,
I see that extends to more things than just passwords, but that's a big focus of it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, this has been great, Alex. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk.
Yep. And everyone else, continue to check back. We're going to have a series of videos with thought leaders from the market talking about these sorts of topics as we go through Security Awareness Month. So we hope to see you come on back really soon. Thanks so much.